My name is Mark Bennett. I am 43, and for most of my life, I believed that family could be built through patience, respect, and consistency. I thought if you showed up every day, kept your word, and never raised your voice when things got hard, people would see you for what you were. Steady, dependable, worthy of love. 7 years ago, I met Claire. She was a school counselor who spent her days untangling other people's children and her nights trying to hold together her own. 2 kids, Lucas and Maddie. Teenagers. Quiet, polite, careful around me in that first awkward stretch when everything still seemed possible. They didn't say much, but they didn't have to. I thought silence meant trust in the making. I thought they were waiting to see if I would stay. A year later, they moved into my house, the one I had built just outside Austin after a decade of saving and longer years of working. A 2-story place with pale stone walls, wide porches, and enough space for laughter to echo without hurting. It wasn't just a house. It was the life I thought I was ready for. A man's proof that he could build something lasting from his own hands. The first weeks felt like sunlight after a storm. Mornings came easy. The smell of coffee drifted down the hall, mixed with the sound of the shower running, the faint rhythm of life finding its balance. Maddie left sticky notes on the fridge with small drawings of cats and hearts. Lucas mowed the lawn without being asked. Claire and I spent evenings on the porch, her head resting against my shoulder, talking about futures that seemed steady and kind. For a time, I let myself believe the hard part was over. That love, given enough patience, could smooth over the rough edges of history. But love doesn't dissolve resentment. It only buries it deep enough to grow roots. The change began so quietly that I almost missed it. A glass left unwashed here. Music played too loud there. The small, careless signs of a world shifting out of orbit. Claire brushed it off. They're teenagers, Mark. It's normal. But normal doesn't feel like erosion until you realize how much ground you've already lost. Soon, my house stopped feeling like home. Dishes gathered in the sink like accusations. Garbage bags sat by the door long after I'd asked for help taking them out. Shoes piled near the stairs. The floors I once polished on Sundays stayed streaked with dirt from Lucas's soccer cleats. Maddie's room, once neat, turned into a storm of clothes, makeup, and open windows that let in every gust of dust from the fields outside. I tried to be patient, tried to model calm. I fixed what broke, replaced what disappeared, and convinced myself that if I just kept showing up, they'd meet me halfway. But each act of care became invisible, swallowed by a silence that grew heavier with time. The real fracture came not from the mess, but from the indifference. I'd ask Lucas to take the trash out. He'd say, yeah, without looking up, then forget or pretend to. Maddie would leave plates in her room for days, half-eaten food spoiling under her bed. I didn't yell. I just reminded, again and again, until the reminders started to sound like background noise even to me. Claire would smile that tired, practiced smile of peacekeepers and say, you know how kids are. It's not personal. But it was. Because when a man opens his home, his time, his wallet, that's personal. When he spends his weekends fixing leaky faucets and repainting walls that others scuff without care, that's personal. One evening, I came home from work later than usual. The living room lights were off except for the blue glow of the TV. Lucas and Maddie were sprawled on the couch, laughing at something on their phones. The coffee table was covered in empty soda cans and crumbs. Claire was upstairs grading papers. Hey, I said quietly, setting my bag down. Could we try to keep things a bit tidier? The place looks rough. Lucas barely looked up. Mom said she'd clean it later. Maddie laughed without lifting her eyes. Yeah, chill, Mark. It was the way she said my name that did it, not cruel, not sharp, but casual. As if I were just another adult passing through their orbit. Not family, not even authority, just the man footing the bills. I stood there for a long second, waiting for something to shift. An apology, a glance, anything that acknowledged I existed. Nothing came. I picked up a few cans, threw them away, and walked to the kitchen. The trash bag was full, overflowing. I tied it shut and took it out myself. The air outside was cooler, quiet except for the cicadas. I stood there in the driveway, bag in hand, staring at the house I had once dreamed would hold everything I loved. From that distance, the lights in the windows looked warm. The kind of glow people in passing cars would think belonged to a happy home. They wouldn't see the silence underneath it, the careful, practiced avoidance that passes for peace. That night, I lay awake beside Claire. She was half asleep, scrolling through her phone, smiling faintly at something unseen. "Do you ever feel like they don't want me here?" I asked. She sighed. "They're still adjusting. It's been 3 years." She didn't answer, so I stopped talking, stopped asking. Silence became the language of our home. Soft, polite, deadly. I started noticing other things. The way Lucas would roll his eyes when I gave advice about college applications. The way Maddie would bring up her real father during arguments, always in comparison. Dad said this. Dad wouldn't care about that. Her dad. A man who sent birthday texts but never showed up. Each mention felt like a subtraction, a reminder of my place. There was one afternoon, a Sunday late summer, when the truth became impossible to ignore. I was in the garage fixing a cabinet hinge when I heard them laughing inside. Claire's voice, light and easy. Lucas teasing her about something. Maddie joining in. I listened for my name. It never came. I stood there, grease on my hands, listening to the sound of a family that had learned how to exist perfectly without me. That's when I understood the quietest kind of rejection. Not the shouted kind that leaves bruises, but the kind that makes you disappear by degrees until you're no longer seen at all. That evening, I walked through the house after everyone was asleep. The walls glowed dimly under the nightlights I'd installed years ago. The hallway smelled faintly of Claire's perfume mixed with dust. I paused at the foot of the stairs and looked around, at the framed pictures Claire had hung. None of me, none of us together. Just the kids, smiling beside a father who never stayed long enough to deserve their love. I felt something tighten in my chest. Not rage, not even sadness, just clarity. The house was still the same structure I had built, the same wood, the same nails, the same foundation. But its spirit had changed. It no longer belonged to the man who built it. I had created a home meant for peace, and somehow it had become a stage where I played the part of the tolerated outsider, the man who paid for everything and owned nothing. That night, before I turned off the last light, I whispered into the dark. Not to them, but to the walls that had held my patience all these years. I built you to keep love in, not to lock me out. Then I went upstairs, closed the bedroom door, and for the first time since they moved in, I wished I lived somewhere else. It started with rules. Not laws, not punishments, just order. I spent most of my life believing that order was love made visible. You take care of what you value. You clean, you fix, you maintain. You create a space where peace can live. I thought if I offered structure, I was offering safety. But in this house, order became the enemy. The morning I wrote the list, I remember how quiet it was. Claire was at work, the kids still asleep. Sunlight spilled across the kitchen counter, catching on the dust that floated above the fruit bowl. The place looked tired. Not dirty, not broken, just weary from the kind of neglect that comes from people who assume someone else will clean up. So I took a pen and wrote 5 simple rules on a yellow notepad. Clean up after yourself. Respect each other's space. Keep curfew reasonable. No phones during meals. Ask before bringing guests. Nothing strict. Nothing cruel. Just the kind of structure any home needs to breathe. I tore the page from the pad and taped it to the refrigerator. A small gesture of hope. By the time they woke up, I was halfway through my coffee. Claire came down first, glanced at the list, smiled faintly and said, "That's fair," but there was no conviction in her tone. She said it the way people agree with something they know will be ignored. When the kids saw it, Maddie laughed. Lucas didn't even look up from his phone. "What's this?" she asked, smirking. "Just a few house rules," I said. She rolled her eyes. "What are we, 5? Maybe not," I said. "But respect doesn't age out." Lucas mumbled something. I caught the word control freak and walked away. It was the beginning of a slow war fought in silence and small rebellions. The dishes piled higher. The lights were left on. The curfews stretched later. Every act of defiance was small enough to be dismissed but pointed enough to send a message. You don't matter here. I wanted to believe they were testing boundaries. That's what parents tell themselves to avoid the truth, that some boundaries aren't meant to be tested. They're meant to be respected. When I tried to talk to Claire, she said, "They'll come around. You just have to give them time." Time for what? I asked. To forget I exist? She sighed. The kind of sigh that means a conversation has already been lost. You're too hard on them, she said. They're good kids. Good kids don't treat people like furniture. She frowned but said nothing. That was how most of our arguments ended, with silence winning by default. Weeks passed. The list on the fridge became part of the decor, yellowing at the corners, ignored like a photograph from a life no one remembered. I stopped expecting change. But something in me started shifting, slow, steady, inevitable. When I came home after work, I'd walk through the rooms like a ghost doing inventory. Shoes scattered by the door, soda cans on the counter, TV blaring upstairs. I'd pick things up, turn off lights, close doors, then stand in the kitchen surrounded by the hum of appliances I paid for, wondering what it all meant anymore. Once, I came home early and found Lucas sitting at the dining table with two friends. Music blasting through a speaker. Empty beer cans lined the counter. He was 17, still legally a kid, but his arrogance filled the room like smoke. "Turn it down," I said quietly. He looked at me, smirked and said, "Mom said it's fine." I knew she hadn't, but I also knew the lie would stand because she'd defend him before she'd defend me. When Claire got home, I told her what happened. She looked tired, eyes soft with apology. "I'll talk to him," she said, but she didn't. Or maybe she did, and he just learned he didn't need to care. Maddie, meanwhile, had taken to disappearing for whole weekends. Sleepovers that stretched into 3-day silences. When I asked where she'd been, she'd shrug and say, "With Dad." Her father, the man who'd left Claire when Maddie was 9, had become a ghost who called once a month and showed up twice a year, always with gifts. Shoes, concert tickets, freedom wrapped in shiny paper. And every time he appeared, Claire softened in a way that told me part of her still lived in that old world. I never spoke ill of him. I thought if I stayed steady, they'd see the difference between noise and consistency. But consistency became invisible. Predictability turned into background hum. The more I tried to hold things together, the more they resented the hold. I remember one night, rain outside, thunder rolling low. We sat at the dinner table in heavy silence. Claire was scrolling through her phone. Maddie texted beneath the table, screen glowing against her face. Lucas chewed with his earbuds in. I said, "Can we put the phones away? Just for dinner?" No one moved. "Maddie," I said again, "please." She sighed, exaggerated. "You're not my real dad, Mark. Chill." The words were quiet, tossed out casually, but they hit like a door closing in my face. Claire looked up, startled, then back down. "That's not nice," she murmured. Not nice. That was her defense. 2 words too weak to mean anything. I didn't respond. I just looked at the 3 of them, my wife and her children, and realized I was the only stranger in the room. That night, I took down the list from the fridge. I folded it once, then twice, and dropped it into the trash. It wasn't anger. It was surrender. Over the next weeks, the house changed its rhythm entirely. The kids came and went without notice. Claire stopped asking where they were. I stopped asking too. When I spoke, no one listened. When I stayed quiet, no one noticed. Invisible, that was the word that finally fit. I used to think that kindness would earn understanding, that calm would be seen as strength. But kindness without boundaries isn't virtue. It's invitation. And every time I forgave their disrespect, I was teaching them how to erase me. One Saturday morning, I woke before dawn, the house still. I walked through the rooms, past the clutter, the half-drawn curtains, the faint smell of last night's pizza. In the living room, I found one of my tools, a hammer, lying on the coffee table beside Lucas's headphones. I picked it up, heavy and familiar in my hand, and thought about how many years I'd spent building things for people who only knew how to break them. That was when I understood. The problem wasn't that they disrespected order. It was that order reminded them of me. And in this house, I had become the enemy. It happened quietly, like all final things do. No slammed doors, no shouting, no grand betrayal. Just a morning that felt different. Cleaner somehow, sharper around the edges. I woke before the alarm. The house was still asleep, a faint drizzle pattering against the windows. I sat at the kitchen table, coffee cooling beside me, staring at the empty chairs. 4 of them. Too many for the silence that had settled in. That morning I made a decision, not out of anger, but from clarity. If I wasn't family, then I had no reason to live as one. The thought came calm, almost merciful, like the end of a fever. I opened my laptop and started with the smallest thing, the Wi-Fi. It had been in my name since day one, part of the invisible web that held their lives together. I logged into the account and clicked cancel. The confirmation email arrived a second later, polite, efficient, indifferent. Then I moved on. Streaming services, phone plans, grocery cards, insurance policies. Each one bore my name like a quiet confession of everything I'd carried alone. Click, confirm, done. Every keystroke was a truth I'd been too afraid to say out loud. You don't know people who don't see you. By the time the sun crept over the fence, I'd erased myself from every system that made their world comfortable. The house stayed silent until nearly 10. Then footsteps, slow, confused, filtered down the stairs. Maddie first, her hair tangled, eyes bleary from sleep. She reached for her phone and frowned. "Wi-Fi's down," she muttered. "Must be," I said. Lucas came next, still in his soccer shorts, scrolling, refreshing, scowling. "Internet's out." I nodded. "I know." He looked up. "You gonna fix it?" "No." He blinked. "What?" "I canceled it." Maddie's laugh was small, uncertain. "Why?" "Because it's mine," I said. "And I don't need it anymore." For a moment, no one spoke. Then Lucas scoffed and walked off, muttering about me being dramatic. Maddie followed. Claire came down last, robe tied loosely, eyes puffy with sleep. "What happened?" "Nothing happened," I said. "I just decided to stop paying for things that don't pay me back." She frowned, trying to read me. "Mark, what are you talking about?" "I'm talking about reality," I said. "The one where I'm a guest in my own house." Her voice softened, coaxing. "You're overreacting." "Maybe," I said, "but at least I'm finally reacting." I stood, poured another cup of coffee, and left her in the kitchen with the silence. By evening, the first ripples had turned into waves. The kids complained about data limits, about Netflix, about things that sounded small but felt enormous in their world. "You're punishing us," Maddie said. "No," I replied. "I'm just letting you experience independence." They didn't understand. How could they? Comfort had always been invisible, something that simply existed like oxygen or light. They had never seen the cost because I'd made sure they never had to. That night, I sat in the living room while they argued upstairs. Their voices rose, sharp with panic. Claire tried to calm them, but her tone carried no conviction. I listened to the noise and felt a strange peace spreading through me. The kind that comes when you've finally stopped begging to be heard. The next morning, I went further. I opened the bank app and froze the shared account Claire used for household expenses, the one she'd quietly turned into her children's safety net. Then I called the insurance company and removed both kids from the policy. Tuition payments were next. I didn't stop them immediately. I just changed the name on the account, hers, not mine. By noon, I'd reclaimed more of myself than I had in years. Claire called me cold that afternoon. She said I was dismantling the family over pride. I told her pride was just the name people gave to boundaries when they didn't like where you drew them. She cried. I didn't. 2 days later, Lucas cornered me in the hallway, phone in hand. "My card's not working," he said. "I know," I answered. "You forgot to refill it?" "No, I canceled it." He laughed, that disbelieving teenage sound. "You can't just do that." "I can," I said. You're 18 now. Adults pay their own way. His eyes flashed. You're insane. No, I said quietly. I'm consistent. He stormed off, slamming a door that I had paid for, in a room I had built, inside a house I had designed to hold all of us. The irony wasn't lost on me. That evening, I found Claire on the porch, smoking. Something she hadn't done in years. They're furious, she said. They'll survive. This isn't you, Mark. You're not vindictive. I'm not. I'm efficient. She exhaled smoke, watching it dissolve into the night. You're tearing this family apart. No, I said. I'm refusing to keep it together with my wallet. She didn't respond, just stared out at the yard, at the tree I'd planted our first spring together. It leaned slightly now, roots pushing against the fence. Growth without direction, that's what it looked like. That's what we'd become. By the third day, the silence in the house was different. Not awkward, hollow, like something had been scooped out of it. Lucas barely came downstairs. Maddie spoke in clipped sentences. Claire avoided my eyes. And yet, for the first time in years, the air felt breathable. One night, I sat at the dining table, bills spread in front of me, a glass of bourbon sweating beside my hand. The lamp cast a soft circle of light on the wood. The same table where I'd once believed we'd share laughter, holidays, memories. Now it was just me and the sound of my own resolve. I whispered the words that had haunted me for years. You're not my dad. This time they didn't hurt. They sounded true, clean, final, almost holy. Because for the first time I believed them. Within a week, the house had emptied itself. Maddie went to stay with her aunt in San Antonio. Lucas followed soon after, crashing with friends. Claire packed a few things, said she needed space. I didn't stop her. I watched from the doorway as they left, bags in hand, eyes filled with confusion, fear, maybe even guilt. The car backed out of the driveway, taillights vanishing down the road. When the silence finally closed in, I thought it might crush me. But it didn't. It held me. That night, I slept through until morning. No slamming doors. No late-night laughter from rooms I wasn't welcome in. Just the sound of rain against the roof. Steady. Forgiving. The next day, I made coffee, sat by the window, and looked around. The house was still mine. For the first time in years, it felt that way. The first week alone felt like recovery. The kind that doesn't hurt until the silence settles in your bones. Every morning I woke to the sound of nothing. No footsteps, no clattering dishes, no muffled music bleeding through the walls. Just stillness. At first it felt wrong, like the calm that follows an explosion. My hands would twitch toward routines that no longer existed. Checking the thermostat, setting out breakfast, listening for car doors that would never open again. Then, little by little, the quiet began to change shape. It stopped feeling empty and started feeling earned. I spent those early days reclaiming the house one room at a time. I repainted the walls, covered the fingerprints, patched the dents from doors slammed in anger. I found coins, earbuds, and half-used lotions tucked in drawers, small fossils of entitlement. I boxed them all up and labeled them Return to Sender. In the master bedroom, I took down the photos from the dresser. Claire had arranged them years ago. Smiling faces framed by sunlight, the illusion of harmony captured for social media. I laid them face down on the floor. For the first time, I saw the outlines of dust where the frames had been. Even the walls seemed relieved. I didn't cry. I just breathed. A month passed before I heard from any of them. It came in the form of a letter, not from Claire, but from Maddie. The handwriting was small, careful. She said they were staying with her aunt in San Antonio. She said things were hard, that she understood now what I had been trying to do. She ended with, "I'm sorry for the way I spoke to you. I see it now." I folded the letter neatly and slipped it into the drawer beside my bed. I didn't answer. Some apologies only have meaning when they're allowed to echo unanswered. 2 weeks later, Claire reached out. A short, polite email. She wanted to transfer the utilities to her name. I let my attorney handle it. When he called, half amused, he said, "She doesn't have a single document tying her to this house." Everything, the deed, the bills, the foundation itself, was mine. There was no triumph in that. Just clarity. Ownership isn't victory when what you've owned was built on illusion. Still, the paperwork came as a kind of absolution. It closed the circle that had been open too long. Afterward, I walked through the house again. Slower this time. I could hear the echo of my own footsteps. It wasn't loneliness I felt. It was freedom learning to speak again. I started cooking for one. Reading again. Sitting on the porch at dusk with a glass of bourbon and no need to fill the silence. Some evenings, I'd catch myself listening for laughter that wasn't coming, and I'd smile. Not out of sadness, but gratitude. Absence, when earned, is a kind of grace. One morning, a small envelope arrived. No return address. Inside was a folded photograph. The four of us at the lake 3 summers ago. Claire's arm around Maddie, Lucas splashing water at the edge. Me in the background holding the camera remote. I remembered that day. The heat, the laughter that felt genuine for once, before everything rotted from the inside. Someone, maybe Claire, had written on the back. We didn't understand. I put it in the same drawer as Maddie's letter. Understanding comes late, and it's expensive. Weeks turned into months. The seasons shifted. I began to feel the house breathe with me. Its creaks, its sighs, the soft hum of the fridge like a living heart. I fixed the fence that had started leaning. I repainted the porch a darker shade of blue. I replaced the dining table with a smaller one, just 2 chairs, enough for reality. The money I once poured into their lives stayed in my account, growing quietly. For years, I had given without measure, confusing sacrifice with love. Now I learned the difference. Love needs witnesses. Sacrifice only needs silence. It was around that time I met Nora. She owned a coffee shop downtown. A small place with mismatched chairs and the smell of cinnamon everywhere. The first time we talked, it wasn't about loss or lessons. She just asked what I did with my days. I told her I was learning how to live alone without being lonely. She smiled like she understood. We started seeing each other casually. Slow walks, simple meals, quiet mornings. She didn't try to fix me or ask for the story behind my distance. She just existed beside it. I found that refreshing. A woman who didn't need saving and didn't want to be saved. One evening, as we sat outside the shop watching the sky bleed into dusk, she asked, "Do you still think about them?" "Sometimes," I said. "Not the way you think. More like remembering a storm. You don't hate the rain, you just don't stand in it anymore." She nodded. "That's a good way to live." Her calm reminded me that balance wasn't a gift. It was something you built piece by piece with people who understood its cost. 3 months later, Maddie called. Her voice was older somehow, slower, careful with its words. She said Lucas had dropped out of community college. Claire was working double shifts. Things weren't easy. Then she said quietly, "We miss you." I let the silence stretch between us until it found its own ending. Then I said, "I hope you're all right," and left it there, because some bridges aren't meant to be crossed again. Some are meant to stand as reminders of where not to return. When the call ended, I sat for a long time by the window, watching the light fade from the yard. The fence line cast long shadows, familiar, steady. The air smelled of rain. That night, for the first time in years, I dreamed of the house not as a battlefield but as what it had always wanted to be. A home. Just smaller, quieter, honest. There's a kind of peace that comes after you stop chasing fairness. After you accept that some people will never thank you for the years you spent keeping their world intact. I found that peace. Not in forgiveness, but in the understanding that I no longer needed it. Every now and then, I still ask myself whether I went too far. Whether reclaiming myself meant punishing them. But when doubt whispers, I walk through the rooms I rebuilt, touch the walls I repainted, and remind myself, this silence isn't loneliness. It's proof that I survived. And that's when the last question comes, quiet, honest, unavoidable. Was I wrong? Or did I finally become the man they refused to see until I was gone?